today, something a little bit different. We're gonna talk about how to build bigger arms, in particular your biceps today, as opposed to triceps, forearms, that sort of thing. The little trope that a lot of people use really tends to be true here. The saying, if you don't have a plan, you plan to fail. First and foremost, you gotta start tracking what you're doing. For me, the primary concern is a size thing, not as much a strength thing. I'm gonna be working at a little bit higher rep ranges, 10 to 12 type range. You can work a little bit higher. And that's something else I have to mention is I made a video last week about why not to mix rep ranges. So during a strength cycle, you typically work anywhere from 4 to 6 and sometimes creep up a little bit more depending on if you're doing AMRAPs or something like that with a heavy enough weight. And if you were working the same multi-joint type movement, like a compound movement, like let's say a bench press, and you at the end of your workout you did 225 for max reps as opposed to doing like 365 earlier for a set of 5 or something like that. Those are more conflicting training modalities. For arms though, if you're adding in something like tricep extensions, or in this case, for this video, we're talking about, let's say, just a regular bicep curl with a dumbbell or something like that. And you're working in, let's say, 12 to 15 reps, even while you're in a strength cycle or a hypertrophy cycle, or regardless. That's really not gonna be as big of a deal as if you're gonna be working with a larger muscle group and mixing up modalities like that. The fact is, you're not gonna be handling nearly the amount of weight or probably nearly the amount of volume, just because the weight is so much lower than what you can handle with those other movements. So honestly, training modalities are not going to be as big of a concern for things like your arms, biceps, triceps, that sort of thing, just because recovering smaller muscle groups like that is not going to be as taxing on your body as it would be if you were just doing something like a bench press or a squat or something like that. Anyway, going back to what I was saying, you have to start tracking. The primary goal for this, for size, is just gaining volume. So you have to start off, and this could be any baseline, just as long as you're slowly gaining volume over time. Let's say you're coming in week 1 and doing 3 sets of 10 bicep curls or something like that. It might be beneficial to maybe, like, if you're going for higher frequency, maybe 2 days later do 3 sets of 12, then 2 days later 3 sets of 15, and maybe the next week you jump over to 4 sets of 10, 4 sets of 12, 4 sets of 15, that sort of thing. But you have to be able to track what you're doing. It doesn't make any sense if you're coming in just willy-nilly every day and just kind of throwing stuff together. You're not going to see any type of consistent progression. That being said, just because you're increasing your volume over time doesn't mean you can't keep the same volume but necessarily use a harder variation. For example, let's say you've been doing supinated bicep curls or something like that, and you're already doing something like maybe like 10 sets, and it's starting to affect the time that you're in the gym or at home, just able to do this in general. One of the things that I might suggest, keep the same volume, but just change up the way that you're doing the movement. Slow down the reps on the descent. Try to control. There's something to the squeezing at the peak. I know you hear a lot of stuff about the mind-muscle connection, but to me it's not as much about that. It just makes the movement a little bit more difficult. It's going to be a little bit more taxing. So if you're starting to get overwhelmed by the amount of volume and just the amount of time that it's taking, just use a harder variation, and you're probably going to see some improvements from that too. That being said, we get back to the training principles of specificity and overload. Unless your goal is to really get stronger in something like a bicep curl, specificity almost goes out the window. Obviously, for your biceps and your triceps and stuff like that, you're pretty much stuck with the shape that you're born with. You got to realize that. All that crap about you hear about, like, this will really start to emphasize your peak a little bit more, it's all garbage. If you're genetically not set up to have good bicep peaks, you're probably not going to have good bicep peaks. That being said though, there are different variations of a lift that's going to develop things differently. For instance, you're going to work your flexors in your forearm a little bit more if you're doing some type of hammer curl or crossbody hammer curls as opposed to a regular supinated bicep curl. Depending on maybe your ratio, maybe you have huge forearms right now, you're probably not going to want to do maybe as much hammer curl type stuff. I, for one, am a big fan of the way that looks. Just look at guys like Phil Heath is a really good example of somebody who's very prominent forearm flexors. or forearm extensions, excuse me. But that's just me. The other thing is don't be afraid to up the frequency a little bit. But don't do it to the point where you're coming into your next heavy workout feeling sore. That's just probably gonna be more counterproductive than anything else. But that's pretty much all I got for today. Until next time, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys later.